What's up, everyone, and welcome into another episode of Wizards Latest. I'm your host and DC sports fan, Ben Robertson, and on this page, we break down all the biggest headlines surrounding the Washington Wizards. So make sure you like and subscribe down below if you haven't already. Drop your comments with any thoughts you might have on the video, whether that might be about the Marcus Smart buyout situation, whether that might be questions you might still have here this offseason. Would love to chat about some of those questions or thoughts down in the comment section with you guys. I appreciate all of the support here on the page. Let's keep it rolling and let's jump right in here today. So, as mentioned, the Wizards bought out Marcus Smart or agreed to a buyout over this past weekend. Blake Wesley as well agreed to a buyout with the Wizards. Want to talk about how these moves impact the roster, how they potentially open up a couple of opportunities. And then the last two topics are really continued conversations I've seen you guys having down below in the comment section. How important, are the veterans still remaining on this roster? Really, primarily talking CJ McCollum, Chris Middleton. What are their roles going to look like next year? And then lastly, just expectations for next season, and really more specifically, how the Wizards should view next year and sort of the, debate I've seen on that matter. So, as always, like I said, thank you for all of the support. And let's talk about Marcus Smart and his buyout situation just a little bit from this past weekend. The 31-year-old guard agreeing to a contract buyout with the Wizards and is set to join the LA Lakers, one of the teams that was viewed as a possible trade candidate for Smart. Marcus is going to be, one of those guys that, especially, maybe for fans that aren't as quite locked in on DC hoops and are just, fans of the NBA, are kind of going to be like, oh yeah, he was a Wizard. 15, games played here last year after being traded for Memphis. Remember, originally when he was sent to Memphis, it was that deal that Washington was included in. Kristaps Porzingis being sent to Boston, Tyus Jones coming here to DC, and then Smart going to the Grizzlies. The trade that brought Smart to DC last year was also included Marvin Bagley as a part of that package. Bagley, remember, was sent from DC to Memphis, of course, recently signed back here with the Wizards. Good luck to Marcus Smart in LA. Hopefully, at least for him, he can just stay on the court. That's sort of been the problem for him the last couple years. The Lakers also waived former Wizard Jordan Goodwin in that move to make room for Marcus Smart. And we're sort of getting to, the point in the offseason where teams are realizing, okay, if we can't find a possible trade candidate for this player, even if that's disappointing, you have to realize if we're trying to move on, this is the situation. And I think the Wizards kind of finding themselves in that spot couldn't get the value or maybe any value really back for Marcus Smart. We had sort of discussed the trade market seemed, kind of eerily quiet, for him. You have to imagine that's a little bit of, the big contract that's also set to expire. And that's why, you see the buyout situation and then him signing with LA. Blake Wesley, of course, also bought out for the Wizards. If Marcus Smart was a forgettable, or bought out by the Wizards, if Marcus Smart was a forgettable Wizard, Blake Wesley is going to be as well. Of course, he suited up for the team. Was also recently acquired in that Kelly Olynyk trade to San Antonio, also bringing over Malachi Branham here to the team. And these couple of moves trim the roster down now to 15 standard contracts. Remember, that had been a discussion here on the page over the last couple weeks, knowing that at least by, the regular season, that roster will have to get trimmed. Well, it's been done. 11 of those 15 contracts, by my count, are players 25 or younger. And by getting the roster trimmed, gives Will Dawkins just a little bit of flexibility if there are moves moving forward here in this offseason, we know this roster is, ever changing and always going to be evolving, especially at this point in our rebuild. And while, it's still right there on the edge, Will Dawkins won't have to worry, so much about if he does make a move or make a trade. About having to then, retrim the roster back down. Remember, it seemed like every time there was a move made here these last few weeks, it was, adding and adding on to that already over the limit team. Um, it also opens up potentially a couple opportunities, particularly at the guard spot, considering two guards have, been moved on from. We talked about AJ Johnson a whole bunch last week. Well, all of a sudden you see him with, a more obvious role coming off the bench. Same thing with Malachi Branham. I think it's probably a similar story for him. You all of a sudden maybe see or envision a much more clear path to large playing time here for him going into next year. So discussed how young the roster, if it wasn't already, the average age just dropped a little bit more by moving on from Marcus Smart. The couple veterans, the 30-plus-year-old guys, of course, on those big contracts set to expire next offseason, Chris Middleton, CJ McCollum, how much should they play, and what should their roles look like on the team next year? Would love to hear your thoughts, a little bit on that down below. It's something I've already seen discussed. I posed last week how, I really want to see, a roster. I want to see Trey Johnson in the starting lineup. I feel like, a backcourt that doesn't include him, to me, it's just hard to wrap my mind around him. I don't think he projects right now as a six man, which so I want to see him on the court as much as possible. I think something for the Wizards to balance here, and I'll talk about this, in the last, bullet point there on the rundown as well. And sort of, this might all come down to how you view next year, but how important is getting, McCollum and Middleton on the court, and having them not only, just show the ropes a little bit to the young players and show them how it's done. I've seen a lot of you guys say that just, running out 5 22-year-olds isn't really maybe a recipe not only for success, but not even for growth for those young players as well. You just need some people to show them the way. On the other hand, you want to get those young players on the court as much as you possibly can, kind of how I feel about Trey Johnson, because that is also going to maybe be the biggest way that they can grow. And, with that question, I think it really comes down to how you view next year with maybe what your answer for that question is. And really, quite simply, do you think the Wizards have any chance of being any good next year, record-wise or not? Or is, tanking or bottoming out, whatever you want to call it, ensuring you end up with that top 8 pick in next year's draft the most important thing to you? Remember, if the Wizards fall out of the top 8 next year, they lose their first round draft pick. And, for me, really, for, this whole offseason, I've kind of been made the point that I think losing that pick could be, potentially really bad and really, I want to say catastrophic, maybe even for the rebuild. However, there's sort of been the growing belief and growing sentiment that with the additions the Wizards have made here this offseason, letting go of a guy like Smart, maybe, the Wizards might be just good enough to, actually compete, or maybe put that top 8 pick in jeopardy next year. I think it's really going to come down for me personally. I mean, maybe even to those first 10 games and just, getting on the court and saying, okay, is this what we have? Remember, we saw sort of what the lineup, a few pieces of it are going to look like in summer league already, are just inserting a Bilal Coulibaly or a CJ McCollum or a Chris Middleton into that group of, young players in summer league. Is that really going to take you, to the next level, into any sort of contention? I'm not sure, but we'll keep you posted about it right here on Wizards Latest. So make sure you stay tuned. We're dropping videos Monday through Friday. Like and subscribe. Drop your comments down below. I appreciate all of the support, you guys. Keep it rolling here on the page, and thanks for watching another episode of Wizards Latest.